This Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Friends, I'm here to inform you that we've made it through another year, 2025. This year, like many, brought some challenges, a lot of rewards, and a ton of learning. In our first year, I had the idea of looking at our Silver Linings Handbook podcast guests to enlighten us and challenge us to think through the many complicated issues that we grapple with as humans. There were moments of inspiration, hope, and clarity in so many people who are trying to make it in the world and trying to make the world a better place. I'll be reflecting on 2025 through the lens of our guests and our listeners. At the end of 2022, we came up with the idea of this podcast. The original inspiration involved the idea of bringing the joys and beauties of coaching and mental health work to a broader world at no cost to them. My voice may be the main one on this podcast, but we pulled together an amazing team of people who contribute to its success, including our amazing producer, Alyssa Miller, and the talented artist, Hannah Hill, who's contributed meaningful visual art that powerfully tells our guest stories. Nina Hadley, who's kept everything running smoothly in the background. For several of the episodes this year, my late friend Jessica Olive Cash contributed to masterful research that really enhanced my ability to understand context and ask the right questions. When we started, I never imagined we would have as many listeners as we do now. We've seen 110% growth in our audience in the last year, and our listeners have created thriving communities in different corners of the internet. In our most listened to episode in March, we explored the disappearance of Layla Santinella, a 20-year-old who vanished from Kingsport, Tennessee. Her mother, Jennifer, and I talked about some of the inequities that exist when it comes to getting attention for cases. Monday, June 26, 2023, was a day that seemed to be a confusing one for Layla. After an argument with her boyfriend's family, she stayed at an AmeriCorps extended stay hotel in Kingsport. Her now thin frame, her bleached blonde hair, her wry smile, and a long-sleeve shirt with FU on it that captured her spunk were all in the last known image of her caught on a security camera in a warehouse parking lot. We discussed Layla's case and that of Hollylyn Snap, a 19-year-old from Kingsport that disappeared around the same time period. Jennifer also touched on those inequities, discussing the case of Layla and Hollylyn. Right. I am, one of the things that I really noticed in listening to the story, you mentioned Hollylyn, but there are so many similarities in the story between Gabby Petito's case and also Maura Murray's case in this case. And by that, I mean, Gabby was showing all these signs of distress. Like they even have it on videotape when the Utah police stopped her and her fiance. You've got, all these little clues that something's going really, really wrong and she's under some measure of serious distress. And, in Maura's case, one of the things I know, having talked to Maura's sister and Brianna Maitland's dad, is that the fact that their disappearances happened so close together in such a similar place brought more attention to the case. And I'm just curious from my perspective, you know, is there a reason why cases like Holly's and Layla's have not gotten the same kind of attention?
I mean, I think you know the answer to that. They are both, they were both active addicts. They aren't seen as like contributing to society. Yes, like you said in your notes, there is that effect that, like, young white people get pushed out harder, but also not if they aren't like college students or aren't squeaky clean, or you know what I mean? If they have a mental disorder, if they're, struggling with addiction, people don't latch on to those stories the same way that they do a shiny, bright college kid. Like when Riley Strain went missing, the whole world
In
knew about
Nashville.
it
He was the
immediately.
college student in Nashville who fell into the water, right? Or something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was everywhere on the news.
Mhm.
And part of me wonders, like, is it not relatable? Then I think to myself, everybody knows a drug addict, right? Everybody has like an alcoholic in their family. Everybody, but you know what hit me? I was like, you know what? Everybody knows one, but we don't talk about it. And I
No.
wonder whether part of it is, part of it's they don't fit this perfect model for, whatever the television story or the nightly news. But I also wonder whether a part of it is, when it comes to mental illness, when it comes to drug addiction, just like so many things, the reason why these cases may not get attention is because it touches on a part of what we don't want to talk about. And by that
Yeah.
I mean, like, we don't want to talk about how we're failing people when it comes to the prevalence of drugs or not appropriately having resources for addiction. No, people don't want to talk about intimate partner abuse because of their own shame, because it's such a scary thing to look at. People don't want to talk about poverty. A lot of people want to pretend that there's not poverty and there's homelessness.
Oh, I
Then
know.
we returned to Appalachia in July for an episode with Phil Eel, where we discuss Phil's book, Prescription for Pain, which explored the story of a University of Chicago trained doctor who was responsible for writing opioid prescriptions that devastated Southern Ohio and surrounding areas. We discuss difficulties of covering communities that we are not a part of, yet the importance of doing it, and doing it in a way that honors realities that go beyond tragedies. I thought a lot and worried a lot about writing about a region that I wasn't from, writing about a region in Appalachia that has been not always treated well or with respect. And similarly, I had apprehensions about writing about addiction because that is also a stigmatized and disrespected community. I approached the victim stories the way I did for many reasons. One, I think we talked at the beginning of why did I feel this was a story, given so many of the existing stories about the opiate epidemic that was worth telling, was because at this point, decades into this crisis, we have all become overwhelmed by the death tolls, the state death tolls, the annual death tolls. They're in the hundreds of thousands. And the opportunity or the occasion to tell the stories of 10, 11, 12 people allowed me to put a face on those overwhelming death tolls. In one of the more moving episodes for me, I had a chance to talk to Kimberly Loring, the sister of Ashley Loring Heavy Runner, a 20-year-old Montana woman who disappeared from the Blackfeet Reservation in 2017. I had heard of Ashley's story on the Prosecutor's podcast, and it turned my attention to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Ashley herself wanted to become an advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I feel as if it's our duty to honor her legacy. But one of the most shocking things for me was the grace and mercy Kimberly was willing to show those who had harmed her sister.
If we can go get her, that's all I want is just for them to just give us a location and so that we can go get her and we can bring her back to our ranch and forget the court cases, forget the justice, just that's all we want is just for her to not be out there waiting, not to be out there laying laying somewhere waiting for us. And I just wish that, like, from the bottom of my heart, that they could just give a location. Like, you can't take back what you did to Ashley. You know, you can't take it back. I know it hurts. I know it hurts them. And I feel bad when I have to bring up, because I'm also bringing up their pain as well. And I just want them to just give up a location, like, tell us that where you put her, you know, so that we can just go get her and bring her back, so that we don't have to keep thinking that she's laying somewhere waiting for us. I don't care about the court cases. I don't care who goes to prison. I just care that Ashley can just go home, because I know from, like, my deep of my soul, I know that that's all she wanted to do, is just go home. Like, you can't take back what you did to her, but you can give her back. You can give her back. Like, that's a choice that you're not doing, is that you can give Ashley back to her. Who cares who hurt her? Who cares what happened to her? But just let her come home. Like, she wasn't an awful person, she was this beautiful girl, and she had this heart that was just so forgiving. And I know deep down that my sister would forgive them. That's what it hurts me, because of what kind of person she is. And that's all I want, is just tell us, is she here? Is she there? Like, can we go get her? You already know that the law enforcement doesn't do justice. Just give her back. Well, just give her back. We already know that nothing's going to happen. Like, why are you holding on to her?
It's a question I will ask myself often when I think about the case. And Kimberly's grace and mercy are something I also think about often when I'm struggling to love or to forgive another person. I had a chance to meet Kimberly face to face in Montana over the summer, as well as some of Ashley's friends and classmates. One of them was a PhD student in forensic anthropology at the University of Montana, who was inspired by Ashley's disappearance to create her own forensic science firm focused on bringing resources to reservations to help solve cases. That friend, Haley Omiso, is a reminder of the fact that suffering is not a barrier to doing something. It is often an inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. I think just going back to your point before, so I'm 28 years old right now, and I've lost at least 10 classmates so far before, the age of 30. I don't think that that's normal, in places off of the reservation, but it is our reality, and that's what happens, whether it was due to an act of violence, due to substance abuse, suicide, things like that. I mean, I think kind of what it comes down to is that our communities just haven't had a chance to heal from past traumas. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma that exists within Indigenous communities like our own. And, that kind of ends up trickling down into, the substance abuse and the mental health issues and grief that we experience today. And so I think once we're able to, really get good resources that revolve around healing from those traumas, I'm hoping that that'll be the day, when we won't see so much violence within our home community anymore.
Haley's resilience matches that of Kim Casey Campbell, an Air Force pilot. In the episode with Kim, we discussed the day over Iraq during the United States war there that her A-10 Warthog jet was hit by enemy fire. She should have gone down, crashed, or parachuted out, but Kim kept on flying, moving the plane as its avionics had failed manually by using pulleys. She made it, and she learned a lot about resilience.
It was a matter of seconds, really, for me to react. But the reality was, like, there's some things that were so vivid to me in that moment. Like, I remember looking down at the Tigris River. I remember, like, the color of the fields and where we were at. And, the thought of having to eject and, like, that's not something I want to do. That will not go well. So while these thoughts are kind of there, at the same time, I'm remembering my training and just, not even thinking about it, but, trying to get the airplane under control is number one. That's not going well.
I'm reminded during periods of turbulence in the world that there are many people silently struggling with their personal turmoil. Andrew Ryan Perfacci took us into the Love Has Won cult and the aftermath of his membership in the group, which is still raining down on him. At a time when cults, conspiracies, and allegations of institutional abuse appear on the rise, he had advice for listeners.
But my advice would be take your risks, do your seeking, don't be afraid, but stay balanced. Listen to your inner voice, ask yourself questions, use your discernment, and don't ever let somebody else control your identity. And don't ever, ever uh, forsake your authenticity. Stand in it in all moments. And if you ever feel like your authenticity is something that is being compromised, there's something very, very wrong.
Robert Peters, an attorney and director of institutional abuse at Grace, an organization that trains Protestant churches and investigates abuse, talked to us about the importance of helping churches change and helping victims recover from their trauma.
But I see just such tremendous potential impact of the church at an individual level in terms of the resiliency that an individual who has experienced trauma can receive from an engaged, compassionate, trauma-informed community. But I also think in the aggregate of what that means for society. And when we think through, the research around adverse childhood experiences, how adverse childhood experiences are correlated to literally every social ill, right? Pick substance abuse, obesity, mental health issues, whatever the case may be. When we reduce the prevalence of abuse and when we enhance resiliency and the protective factors that enable us to navigate that and cope with that in a productive way, that's a different world.
In June, Clara S. Lewis, a Dartmouth College professor and the author of American Infanticide, introduced me to the case of Emily Weaver, a young Ohio college student who was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life without parole after she gave birth to a baby in a bathroom in her sorority house. We explored whether we, as a society, got the case and so many like it wrong, and the costs we pay for turning a blind eye to some of the struggles of young women, especially when it comes to topics that we as a society want to turn away from.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And actually, it reminds me that, the very first time I sat down with Emily in prison to do our first set of interviews, and I work with college students, and she was a college student. She was that same age. And I remember the thing that struck me or just surprised me at first was just sitting with her. She was exactly like all of my students, in so many ways. Just her normalcy was the thing that sort of surprised me the most at first. And then, of course, it became oh, of course she is. And these myths or these narratives make it seem like risk is cordoned off. And I think it's a real disservice because no one thinks this could happen to them. No one thinks, oh, this could happen to my best friend or my daughter or my niece, because we have this image of this monster.
One of the joys of my year was to correspond with Emily and hear how well she's doing and how she's quietly making a difference from prison. I met Clara through Brian Santana, another guest who was an English professor who at the time taught a true crime class at Shenandoah University in West Virginia. With his brother Cameron, a retired police officer, Brian wrote a book called Murder on Campus, which explored the killing of 19-year-old Ginger Olson at the University of North Carolina, Asheville in 1973. We discussed why it is important to focus on a more than 50-year-old mystery.
Yeah, I think that you talked earlier about the kind of ripple effect that murders have far beyond just the actual crime itself on people. And so I think being able to see that up close was something that was very eye-opening for me.
I think that in the process of writing this book, Cameron tells some personal stories about his own experiences in law enforcement on crime scenes and other things, including one story that I'm not going to repeat here, but because I wouldn't be able to tell it in the way he does, but one story that in real life would have left me traumatized, right? So I came to like a different appreciation. I think I learned a lot about Cameron from kind of writing this book and heard stories from him about his experiences I had never heard before. Being able to hear about other people's experiences that knew Ginger Olson was very rewarding as well. I think not only to kind of understand and think about grief and how that works and how that's and how this event kind of shaped the trajectory of their lives, but then also thinking about like how thinking about all of this kind of gives me a way to think about some of my own experiences.
Cameron expresses hope that the case will someday be solved for Ginger's friends, her family, and because of the power that justice has to bring some, even if inadequate, balance into the world.
I think from a law enforcement perspective, this really just is a good example of how important it is to maintain crime scene security, and that you've really got to preserve the evidence the best that you can, because we really don't know what the technology is going to be 20, 30, 50 years from now. The officers on scene that day, they had no clue about the capabilities that we have today. And I feel like for officers today, that's kind of the same thing. You were saying about how DNA technology is continuing to evolve. And I definitely think that that is going to continue to be the future to solve these cold cases. But then I think for me, just like what I got out of this case was, I thought it was really cool that me and my brother spent so much time. I live in North Carolina. He lives in West Virginia, but we were on the phone nightly talking with each other and working through this. And so, it's that part of the process has been really good. And I also do want to point out that it's nice to hear that her high school classmates, even after 52 years, are still not giving up, and they're doing the best they can to bring this to light as well.
Like the words of Kimberly Loring, my conversation with Dan and Jill Harrington, the parents of Morgan Dana Harrington, was moving. Morgan was a 20-year-old Virginia Tech student who was abducted outside the John Paul Jones Arena at the University of Virginia in 2009. She was found murdered in a field many months later. Jill and Dan helped me see how some of the most painful things in life can be turned into gifts. Jill highlighted this truth.
We had a picture-perfect life. We had a beautiful, precious daughter. That picture was smashed into shards October 17th, 2009, when Morgan was murdered. What do you do with shards? Well, if you are very determined and creative, you can take the pieces, the shards of your picture and reassemble them. It's no longer the same picture. Perhaps now it's an abstract mosaic, but it still can have beauty that will sustain you. You don't find happiness in a life. You make it. And it took some time for us to realize we had to relinquish the old life and build anew. You don't get over it, but you can get past it.
Jill and Dan created an organization and helped support scholarship funds that have impacted the lives of many across the United States and as far away as schools in Zambia.
And so I remember taking Morgan back to Tech. Jill was actually in Zambia, and we had lunch in Blacksburg, and it was just such a neat thing to see Morgan mature and decide that she was going to be a teacher, and she had moved beyond the struggles, I think, that kids have, during those teenage years. And, of course, Morgan's life ended, but, we were also able, as Jill said, she started Help Save the Next Girl.
A predator named Jesse Matthew Jr. was eventually convicted of Morgan's murder, as well as that of 19-year-old Hannah Graham, a University of Virginia student. Reporting and investigations also showed that he was responsible for a brutal rape of a woman in Fairfax, Virginia, and sexual assaults that went uninvestigated at Liberty University and Christopher Newport University. In a poignant moment during the Matthew trial, Jill walked over to Matthew's mother and embraced her. He was able, in that reading about Hannah Graham's last night and his behavior, then he was unbelievably, inappropriate with people, but he was able to strike up conversations and, obviously did not seem that threatening to some people, even if inappropriate. And I wonder whether we look at who predators are the wrong way, or we're looking at the wrong things, or we're missing the something. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. He is an apex predator, and I think that he is different stuff than we. I think that, in the animal kingdom, for every population of mice, there are a couple of owls, and they prey on the mice. Apex predators go where the prey is, and they try and blend in. Jesse Matthew had the persona or the mask of being a gentle giant. That's what everyone who knew him said. Oh, he was a gentle giant. But if you watch the video of him when he sees Hannah Graham on the downtown mall in Charlottesville, he's ambling along like Fat Albert, and he sees her, and in 3 strides, he whips around and he turns into cheetah predator. It's a dramatic change. I also, I don't hate Jesse Matthew. I never have. But it's kind of like, when you have a bear in your neighborhood and he's knocking over trash cans and creating a ruckus, you don't hate the bear. It's doing what bears do. But the bear can't be running around your neighborhood. You have to keep people safe. I feel the same way about Jesse Matthew.
Hannah's artwork captures Morgan's life and the family's suffering and the resurrection from the ashes that in many ways my words never could. Family members and loved ones were a theme for the year. In June, Sam Holt came on to talk about her mother, Dawn Michelle Holt. Sam truly never got a chance to know her mother.
Once I hit like 13, I started getting kind of angry. Angry at her, angry at whoever took her from us, just angry at the whole situation. And that just kept going until I was probably like 21. And at that point, I was able to put myself in her shoes. Not necessarily doing the things that she was doing, but seeing that at 21, I had no freaking clue what I was doing yet. And you had 2 kids at 20. Like I lived longer than she had, and that really messed with me. Later on, I did. I spent quite a few more years, like, still questioning if I should be angry with her or not. And mainly because that's what I was fed when I was growing up. That she was this bad person, that she left us, that she chose drugs over us. When there was so much more to her story that I wished I was told. Because there was more to it. She was more than just somebody who got addicted to drugs and all of the events that happened afterwards. And I didn't get to know any of that.
Christine Means and Karen Watson came on to discuss the unsolved death of their sister, Dion Thomas, in Gallup, New Mexico, one of the most dangerous areas of the country for Indigenous women. Christine talked with me about some of the systemic issues.
And, growing up, our dad was an alcoholic. We had so many family members that struggled with alcoholism to the point where when they were bad off, you could hardly recognize them. And that was very much a normal thing to experience because it was like this, like it could go from any direction to the other in terms of how severe they were drinking to just like, oh, hey, you're back and we're back on track and it's Monday and it's back to business and it's normal again. So, I grew up with a lot of worry about, is my family member going to come home? Are they alive? Are they in jail? Are they dead? And we just don't know it yet because this happens often. People pass out on the side of the road and nobody stops for them. And then, Dion went through this phase and it was really stressful. And there were times um, in our family where, middle of the night, urgent emergency calls because, we have such a big family. We have young children, teenagers who were going through a lot of things. We had my sister, we had family members who were battling addiction, where you left your phone on all night. And if somebody called at 2 a.m. from the hospital, the ER, whatever issue, you had to answer because it would be a matter of life or death sometimes. And I remember when things after Dion's death, after things had settled in our family, when I stopped falling asleep with that anxiety and that worry, and was like, you know what, it's okay. It's okay that tonight I'm not going to leave my phone on because nobody's going to call me. And that's when I recognized, that level of anxiety and the emotional distress that you pick up when, just like you kind of tune into the traumatic events that may be coming and you're anticipating something bad happening.
And Karen spoke about how the family has persevered and grown from the tragedy.
And we can sit back and we can laugh about it a little and we can all come together. And it's brought us together. And I think even with our siblings, we've, tried to help one another and bring each other up because in the end, if one of us is suffering, we're all suffering. And, we need to get through that.
Victorio Shaw, a tribal judge in California, came on to discuss the disappearance of his cousin, 33-year-old Emily Risling, a Hoopa tribe member who disappeared from Humboldt County, California. Humboldt County has gotten a lot of attention through the documentary Murder Mountain, which explores the part of the country with the most disappearances. Yet oddly, the documentary does not touch on the case of one missing Indigenous person, despite there being so many there.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I saw that documentary as well. I've referred to Native Americans as sort of an invisible race in this country. You always see some poll, some pie chart on the news. It's like, blacks, Hispanics, Asian, and then other, we never get our own category, our own statistic. And we are sort of invisible to most Americans. And I was shocked when I was young. I went to visit my relatives in Tennessee where my dad grew up, and they couldn't believe that they were talking to a Native American. They were just like, I didn't know there was any more Native Americans left. They're like, that's so great. I'm like, well, isn't that great? I was like, oh my gosh. There's people who don't believe that we're still here. And, certainly the media and the news overlooks us. It just depends, I guess, what part of the country you live in. But yeah, the documentary was a little troubling, especially since we have such large reservations. The largest land-based reservations in the state of California are in Humboldt County, and there are tons of issues with marijuana growing on the reservations. So the fact that they didn't devote part of an episode to going up to, Hoopah to talk to people, they missed an opportunity there to, I think, explore something that's pretty interesting that really, to my knowledge, really hasn't been explored in terms of how does that affect missing people or crime or, things of that nature.
Monte Frank and Joe Wojak, two first responders, spoke about how they first met after they both lost their children, Monte to a domestic violence murder, and Joe to an Arizona fire where his son was working as a wildland firefighter.
It was interesting because, as Monty says, as first responders, we have that brother and sisterhood. We go into harm's way together, and we don't have to talk about it. We just did it, and we do it, and we're friends, and we're part of that family. But we're also part of that family that we lost children. So now, how do you not just become instant friends, like you said earlier, somebody you knew forever, instantly. So that's kind of how it was. It was great showing them around. We've had conversations since. I get to talk about my boy. I get to brag about him a little bit, and that's why I don't mind talking about it. I do some public speaking, and I find that there are so many first responders that I come across that have lost children that I would have never known about. And they come up after the class or after I talk, and they talk about losing their son or their daughter, and it's amazing how many people actually have lost children. And I can tell you that before we lost Kevin and the other 18 Granite Mountain hotshots, I had never really thought about it. I mean, we had some firefighters that had their children had accidents, and we had one friend, their daughter died of cancer. So we'd been exposed to it, but it really wasn't something that was, right in front of you all the time. It was wonderful meeting Monty and getting to share our stories about our children.
I think my path, meeting Joe, was one of those things that were meant to happen. And little did I know that in our conversations that his son Kevin was one of the Granite Mountain hotshots of the 19 who perished in that fire. And it just hit me, just chilled me to the bone, meeting this father, this LA County, firefighter, paramedic leader who had lost his son in one of the most horrific, fires that we study and read about. And then in our conversation of just realizing that he had buried his son, and then talking with Joe, realizing that I had also buried my child, my daughter. And it just was one of those times where this bond of being fathers, this bond of being firefighters, but even more, Jason, this bond of here are two seasoned first responders, tribal LA County, who had buried their children. And I have never met another responder who has done that. And tears were shed, and there were hugs, and there was, to me and to Joe and to Jason, this bond that I think so few of us will ever walk through or live through, which is that we have buried our children, in our lives, which shouldn't happen.
Brett Talley of the Prosecutors Podcast joined me for a coda to the 2017 murders of 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby Germain in Delphi, Indiana, and the conviction of a local man named Richard Allen. In another example of Hannah's artwork capturing what words cannot, the image from the episode shows the girls' pictures on a cell phone that Libby used to take a video of their kidnapper, and Abby hid underneath her, essentially solving their own murders. It's another example of how Hannah's artwork has elevated our storytelling.
So, I mean, I will say this, and I'm trying not to do this, but it's just hard. This case became very personal to me. You know, it affected me personally in a way that probably, if I were, I mean, I don't know, you're a journalist, so you have a better feeling about this. And I don't know. I assume they teach this in journalism school, like how to avoid becoming personally affected by the things you cover, because I think that's really important, especially when you're trying to maintain objectivity. By the end of this case, though, you know, I knew the family. I had met them several times. You know, I was at Crime Con and walked into a room, and there they were sitting down. They called me over, and I sat down with them for like 30 minutes, and they talked about that day, and everybody cried. And it's just, after that, how can you not care deeply about what happens?
Perhaps no one in the media showed more care for Abby and Libby than Kevin Greenlee and Anya Kane, the hosts of the Murder Sheet podcast, who published a book this summer on the case called Shadow of the Bridge. They joined me to discuss their book and their journey with Abby and Libby. It's really, the last time you guys were on, I made the point that one of the things that you guys have done in your work is you bore witness for the girls, the two girls who walked out onto that bridge that day, and that really came through in the book, and the care that you took with it, and bringing in all the different perspectives and voices, and really, I think also in clearing up what for me, or for a lot of people, were a lot of misconceptions. So I feel like it's a real important contribution to the case.
Jason, why are you trying to make us cry right away? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That means an incredible amount to us. Just your support throughout this whole insane situation has meant so much to us. So I'm so glad. That's really validating to hear that you had that reaction to the book. And we really appreciate it. We wanted from the beginning for this to be, I think this case in particular, it's such a, there's such a scope to it, and there's so many different players. What we really hope to do is try to, tell the story in a way that, first of all, made sense and sort of captured a lot of different people's contributions to it. So I think, so if we succeeded in that, then that's immensely gratifying, and thank you.
Yeah, I think you really did. I think, I think one of the things about your podcast that sort of stands out through your coverage of the entire case is, I really felt, and, this is my personal take, that one of the guiding principles for you guys was to follow the truth, not to, follow whatever bright, shiny toy. And I know from your reporting, you probably knew about all the bright, shiny toys. Julia Cowley, a retired FBI profiler and host of the Consult podcast, joined me again this year for our annual October tradition of exploring some of the most haunting cases. This year, we focused on the murders committed by Brian Kohberger, but ended up off track as we began to talk about the survivors who were in the house when Madison Mogen, Zana Kernudel, Kaylee Goncalves, and Ethan Chapin, 4 University of Idaho students, were stabbed to death in 2022 by Kohberger, who pled guilty to the charges this year. Julia pointed out the dangers of speculation, particularly when it comes to survivors of crimes.
You can speculate all you want. Some of the accusations are so dangerous. They're so irresponsible. It is, I don't understand how anyone can, sitting at their home, never having worked a crime scene, never having investigated these types of cases. And all you're doing is reading media reports and rumors and, oh, somebody said this. And then announcing a
Your
suspect.
theory. Yeah.
It is the most irresponsible thing. And I mean, just imagine that happening to you and having your life completely upended and you have absolutely nothing to do with this crime. It's so dangerous to do. It's irresponsible and they have no basis whatsoever. I don't even have a basis,
Right. Yes.
I
Right.
know I don't know.
Right.
And
Which may be the real difference. You know,
I
you
mean,
don't know.
we don't know. I know how the investigation is likely going to unfold. I know what BAU would do and likely what they would be asking for. I know all those things. I could talk generally, but to say I know what happened in that house, that was like when you and I first started, and I was getting so many messages. What do you think happened? I'm like, I don't know. And my husband always jokes, and we'll be watching a true crime show, and he'll be like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, "What good are you?"
We also explored how there's a better way because you have to follow the laws. You got to cover events that are in the public interest. But there's a lot of suffering already out there in the world. And I don't necessarily want to add to the suffering by whatever I'm doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think you make a very good point. I mean, I'm sorry about your friend.
Yeah. Thank you.
I know what you're thinking of. Kindness is never wasted.
We also discussed in another episode a case that haunted us both, the 1996 murder of Karina Homer. I was a reporter for the Boston Globe at the time that the upper body of the Swedish au pair was found in a dumpster behind a nice apartment building near Fenway Park, and Julia later was an FBI agent in the Boston division. Julia contrasted the killing with the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Dahlia, in Los Angeles.
So the number one thing that stood out to me, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but they probably would agree with this, is that the murderer of Karina did not want her found. And the murderer of Elizabeth Short absolutely wanted her found. There was no doubt about that. So, I mean, right off the bat, they're different. These are different crimes. The relationship between the offender and the victim is likely different, and the motives are likely different. Or I should say, possibly different. But that was the number one thing that stood out to me. These are not at all alike, people. And I understand why, if somebody is looking at the Black Dahlia case, why they would go look at Karina Homer's case. Two very high profile cases of young women who were cut in half. And you don't see that very often. So obviously you're going to compare them. But the comparisons really stop there.
Julia also joined Brett Talley and Alice LaCour of the Prosecutors Podcast to discuss ethics in true crime. In this humorous exchange, we spoke about our different approaches to social media, and Alice talks about the reasons why it's worth it to advocate for awareness. And Julia, ever the profiler, nailed our individual behaviors and motivations to a T.
Sometimes I even start to respond to something and then I just don't respond. And then it does, for me, passes. I don't feel it festers. I'm like, okay, I'm over that. Because it's so fleeting. X and Twitter, any kind of social media, it's so fleeting. People forget and they go on to the next.
This is kind of interesting. As you were talking, I definitely see that. I'm more likely to jump in. Brett's more likely than me, but I'm more likely than you. But
yeah,
I've
different because you really think you can talk to people. You have that counselor, and I mean that you have that counselor in you where you think, let's have a nice conversation.
Yeah,
whereas
might as
Brett's
well.
like, you're a moron.
And Jason believes in the good of people.
The 1-2 punch.
Jason really wants to have he believes the best in people, and that they're saying things out of the goodness of their heart, and he can teach them the ways, and he can hear them out and have that conversation. And Brett, on the other hand, is just like, he's not having it. I don't mean to interrupt, but
Which makes it really funny when Brett and I are on the same chain.
Which is why, actually, I'll circle this up and be on the complete end of the spectrum, which is funny because obviously we are all on social media based on the new media we are part of. I really hate talking about true crime on social media for that exact reason. Most people go, and I say social media in the sense of where there's no real interaction, where you can actually talk to each other, because I think people go there to make their 180 character bomb and run away rather than to actually change minds and hearts. And what I said at the very beginning, how we are not just dealing with, exciting news and fun bits of information. We're dealing with real people's lives. And because of that, the delicacy of it, it's a necessary evil in some ways of having to discuss it, because that's how you raise awareness. It's how you get people to know about your cases. It's how you draw attention. So obviously we need to use it.
Not every episode was universally well received, despite them being some of our most listened to. Some of those episodes were with Jason Ursey, discussing the case of Temujin Kensu, a Michigan man who says he's wrongfully convicted of the 1986 murder of Scott Macklem, and an interview with Billy Jensen, a journalist and former true crime podcaster who ended up in a scandal of his own making. But they both connect to my firm belief that in the case of Temujin, if he was wrongfully convicted, an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And in Billy's case, that in the world where we live, people are deserving of second or third or even fourth chances. His growth has amazed me. Jason discussed his desire to find truth in the case. For him, it was less about Temujin and more about Scott Macklem.
The thing that I want the most is to find out what happened to Scott. I don't care. If that means Temujin did it, then that's what it means. Scott Macklem, 20 years old, was gunned down in broad daylight in his college campus parking lot. And that breaks my heart. Because one time, I was a 20-year-old guy.
Right.
And campus parking lot. And I can't imagine.
Someday you're going to have kids who are probably 20-year-old guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His family didn't deserve it. He certainly didn't deserve it. I don't care if he was doing things he shouldn't have been doing. Somebody shot him dead in broad daylight. And I do firmly believe that the guy that's in prison for it didn't do it. And I'm fighting like hell to, part one, rectify that. And part two, figure out what the hell happened that day. If part one and part two coincide, great. It gives me less work. But I do believe that there is something more here that we need to look at. And I don't care, I have no judgment on anything. I want his parents, Scott's parents, to have some peace in their heart of what happened to their son. I want Scott to have some peace in his soul. I want Temujin to be out if he is innocent of this crime. I want Crystal to not think that it's Temujin if that's the case. Those are the things I want. It makes me insane to feel like we are talking about something that seems to me so very cut and dried. But I believe it's true, but I will say that the real, despite the fact that this podcast is called Inconceivable, the story of Temujin Kensu, Like, this is a lot about Scott. I just have nothing about Scott yet. And I want them to tell me about Scott. I would love to know about Scott. He looked like a handsome, well-liked person in Croswell, Michigan. I went and prayed with him. I want to know about Scott. And if they listen to this, I hope they will, to reach out to me.
In the episode with Billy, who's a brother in recovery, and both of us were journalists who have been responsible for scandal, we talk about the difficulty of recovering from that and returning to normal life.
And then, especially when you're in a business that you're, what you're doing is our business is very much about getting after the bad guys. So then, and sometimes people get up with that or whatever. So there is a lot of people that are just clapping when you go down.
Gilbert King, the author of the book Bone Valley and host of the podcast by the same name, joined us to talk about the powerful story of Jeremy Scott, a man who confessed to the murder of Michelle Schofield that Michelle's husband, Leo, had been convicted of, and, like Kimberly, the power of forgiveness that in this case, Leo extended to Jeremy. Like, Jeremy can't be redeemed or cannot be rehabilitated, but he can be redeemed through love. Leo can't get those years back, but he can be freed by Jeremy's best version of love. Justin can't get a father back and a stable home back, and Jamie can't heal, or her trauma can't disappear, but she can heal and he can heal. And it's all because love is coming from these surprising places, from a guy who's willing to forgive the guy who murdered him, from the murderer himself. It's really, really, really interesting. I think you've told me a story that in my worst moments of anger or holding a grudge or being down, it's a story of hope against a system that sometimes just pushes in the opposite direction. And I really think it's a story, as weird as this may sound, I think it's a story about love.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I don't say it because it's like, it gets me emotional sometimes, but we all felt it. And, I'll just remind you of another story that like this, when I first met Scott Cupp, first interview with him, the Judge Scott Cupp, the one that gave me the business.
Gave you the idea.
Started all this thing.
Right.
Which, he's like, aren't you, do you regret this? Like, it's been like 7 years of your life like now. But, the first time we interviewed him, I asked a dumb question because I was still learning about the case. I said, what does Leo mean to you? Without any of the real understanding of where we are now, he just kind of looked at me and his eyes glassed over and he just kind of like made this motion across his throat, like stop, cut. And he started crying. And I'm like, this is a freaking prosecutor and a judge. And I'm talking about a guy who's in prison for murder, and he broke down. And like, I didn't understand it then. It took me a long time to understand how he gotten to that point. And it's because that's the effect Leo had on him. It's the reason he was willing to risk his legal career by speaking out about this case and also stepping off the bench.
And Brett joined me again for our October tradition of exploring mysteries. We talked about the monsters that we create and the lessons that we can learn from them.
No, I think that's right. I think if you look at the monsters that inhabit our folklore, that sort of dominate our past, a lot of times it's not so much that they come from fear, but it's more a lesson. It's an embodiment of something that we value. And you mentioned the Wendigo, and that's such a great example because you have these people, the Algonquin-speaking people in Canada, who are living these very austere lives. They're hunter-gatherers. They depend on being able to find food. They depend on working together. They depend on sharing what they find. And there's this notion in that culture that greed and gluttony and selfishness is a real danger. There's a great story about how in the Ojibwe people, I think in particular, at some point with a child, they would be offered a piece of food and a piece of charcoal. And if they went for the food, they would be admonished. Whereas if they went for the charcoal, they would be praised. And the whole idea was you need to be willing to sacrifice your own needs for the good of the group, because if you don't, everyone will perish. And the Wendigo was this physical, spiritual manifestation of that greed, this idea that if you lost control, if you did something like went against one of humanity's greatest taboos, committed cannibalism in a time of famine rather than working together to survive, you would be taken over by this creature and tortured for what you did. And so just this, we have to avoid that at all costs. And it really came to dominate the fears of people, but it was for a good purpose, right? And I think you see that in so many different cultures in so many different ways, where these creatures that we normally think of today as sort of sources of fear and, things that we have fun with around Halloween, at the time when they were developed or when they were really thought about, it was very much about that moral value in the community. And that's always been something that struck me.
We also discuss how we see the real monsters when we don't learn lessons from the fake ones.
No, I agree. And I think arguably we see real monsters when the fake monsters fail. We see real monsters when fiction isn't enough to teach people or to change people or to encourage people. We've been talking about the Wendigo and zombies and all those other things and some of the messages that they're sending about being kind, working together, not being selfish, not being someone who takes advantage of other people. And the real life monsters out there, they didn't learn any of those lessons, right? Their lives are all about satisfying whatever sort of dark desire they have in themselves that they either can't control or they don't want to control. And I don't think there's much to learn from them at all, other than this is what happens when people lose sight of their humanity, which I think is inextricably tied up in these stories that we tell ourselves and the lessons we try and learn from them.
Even though Brett and I focus on mysteries in October, really, if you think about it, everything about the podcast involves looking at mysteries. The mysteries of cults, the mysteries of love, the mysteries of loss, and all sorts of other mysteries that bind us as we try to travel through this complex world. This is Jason Blair. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again next year.